Setting the scene. The narrator stands at the window of a small, rustic cabin nestled deep in the forests of Upper Canada. It's a familiar scene, the scent of pine wood in the air, the warmth of the crackling fire, and the soft murmur of old Christmas carols playing on the radio. The holiday season is fast approaching, and for the first time in years, it's their turn to host the family Christmas gathering. Across the country, relatives are preparing for the holiday, each in their own homes. Some are already packing for the long drive up north, while others are still finalizing travel plans. But the narrator has taken it upon themselves to prepare the cabin for the occasion, decorating the tree with old ornaments passed down through generations, hanging wreaths made from fresh evergreen, and preparing the guest rooms. There's a sense of anticipation in the air, not just for the gathering, but for the joy of bringing the family together after a long time apart. A perfect Christmas is just within reach. But the weather, as usual in these parts, has its own plans. The sky darkens ominously, a warning of the snowstorm that is already taking shape. Snowstorm and suspense. It's late afternoon when the first flakes begin to fall, soft at first but soon growing in size and ferocity. By evening the snow is coming down in heavy swirling sheets, the winds howling through the trees and rattling the cabin windows. The radio crackles with warnings. A severe winter storm is heading their way, and those who were traveling should seek shelter immediately. The narrator had spoken with their brother just an hour before, but with the storm worsening, he's called again, his voice strained with frustration. His car has slid off the road, and the highways are impassable. He'll have to stay at a nearby motel until the storm lets up. With the phone connection cutting in and out, the narrator hears him in the distance, his words fading as the wind picks up in the background. The narrator sighs and stares out the window, feeling a pang of loneliness as the storm intensifies. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Christmas was meant to be a time for togetherness, not isolation. But they resolved to make the best of it. After all, their brother will be there soon enough, and the family will gather as planned. For now, though, the house is quiet, save for the hum of the wind and the soft thud of snow piling up against the door. As the evening drags on, the narrator grows more restless. The cabin feels unusually quiet, almost too still, with only the storm's fury outside to break the silence. They put another log on the fire and curl up with a book, but it's hard to focus. The storm is only getting worse, and as the hours pass, it seems to press in around them, its sounds growing more unsettling. Suddenly, a sharp noise interrupts their thoughts, a faint but unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching through the snow just outside the cabin. The mysterious visitor. The narrator's heart skips a beat. At first, they tell themselves it's just the wind or an animal, maybe a deer or a coyote. But the footsteps don't stop. They're slow, deliberate, as though someone is pacing just outside, circling the house. The narrator stands up and walks to the window, but the storm is so thick that visibility is almost zero. They call out into the darkness, "Hello? Is someone out there?" There's no response, just the relentless howling of the wind. Yet the footsteps continue, drawing closer to the front door. A knock shatters the silence, soft at first, then louder. The narrator hesitates. Who could possibly be out in this weather? No one should be foolish enough to venture into the storm alone. As the knock turns into frantic pounding, the narrator's unease grows. With a deep breath, they cross to the door and peek through the peephole. A man stands on the porch, his face barely visible through the swirling snow. He's dressed in an old, tattered coat, his eyes wild with desperation. "Please," he calls out, his voice muffled by the storm. "I'm lost. My car broke down. Can I come in?" The narrator's pulse quickens. Something feels off. They don't want to open the door, not to this stranger in the middle of a snowstorm. But what choice do they have? It's dangerous out there, and he claims to be lost. They shout through the door, "You can't stay here! The storm's too dangerous." There's nothing I can do. But the pounding continues, harder now. The man's voice rises, tinged with frustration. "I don't have anywhere else to go," he yells, banging on the door again. "Please, let me in. It's freezing out here." The narrator's hand hovers over the door handle, indecision gripping them. The man's voice grows more frantic, and for a moment they wonder if this is some kind of trick, if they're being set up, if the man has an accomplice waiting in the storm. But they can't be sure. There's a gnawing feeling of dread that grows with each passing second. Then, just as the narrator is about to turn away, the man says something that sends a chill down their spine. "I've been following you. I know you're in there." The words hang in the air like a thick fog. The narrator steps back from the door, their heart pounding in their chest. The storm outside seems to quiet for a moment, as if the world is holding its breath. Then the pounding resumes, faster, more insistent. The narrator glances nervously toward the window. Is anyone else out there? What does this man want, and why does he seem so intent on getting inside? With trembling hands, the narrator grabs the phone, but there's no signal. The isolation of the cabin now feels more like a trap. The storm outside rages louder, and the strange, desperate man outside continues to demand entry. What will the narrator do? How will they survive this long, strange night? Break-in and confrontation. The pounding on the door grows louder, more insistent. The stranger's voice, now tinged with desperation and anger, demands to be let in, but the narrator hesitates. Cold fear settles in their chest as they back away from the door. Something doesn't sit right. There's an urgency to the man's pleas that feels like a warning. They peer through the window again, but all they see is the swirling white chaos of the snowstorm, the man's figure barely visible against the vast, dark night. Then, without warning, the sound of breaking glass shatters the tense silence. The narrator jumps back, heart racing. The man has broken a window. Frantic footsteps now echo in the distance, closer than before. The narrator rushes to lock all the doors and windows, their breath shallow and erratic. The sound of footsteps inside the cabin sends a jolt of fear through their body. Someone is in the house. The man's voice calls out from the hallway. "I'm not leaving without help." The narrator grabs the phone, but there's no signal. Panic surges. They rush to their bedroom, locking the door behind them, and grab the gun that's stored in the drawer for emergencies. Their hands tremble as they hold it, the weight of the weapon strangely grounding them. The footsteps outside their room become louder. A second person is now in the house. 2 men. Their voices are low but sharp, and the narrator can hear them rummaging through the living room, tearing at drawers, flipping over furniture. "This place is full of junk," one of them mutters. "What do you think, the old man has cash hidden somewhere?" The narrator's pulse quickens. They hold their breath, trying not to make a sound. The floorboards creak under the men's weight as they move through the house. One of them is getting closer, the sound of his steps echoing down the hallway. The narrator grips the gun tighter, fighting to stay calm. The door handle rattles. The narrator's heart skips a beat. The man outside the bedroom door mutters something unintelligible, and then a loud crash echoes through the house as they break open a cabinet. More things are being thrown around, glass breaking, wooden chairs splintering. The men are ransacking the house. The narrator silently prepares to defend themselves, their mind racing through possible scenarios. They can't stay hidden forever, but making a run for it would be just as dangerous. There's no way out without confronting them. After what feels like an eternity, the sounds of movement grow quieter. The 2 men are now in the kitchen. The narrator hears a distant drawer being opened and the unmistakable sound of something metal scraping across the floor. Then, suddenly, silence. The door bursts open, and the men make a quick dash toward the exit. Footsteps retreat toward the door, followed by the sound of a vehicle starting up in the driveway. The narrator remains frozen in their bedroom, guns still gripped tightly in their hands, trying to make sense of what just happened. The house feels eerily quiet, the storm outside now the only sound that fills the air. The fear, the adrenaline, the sense of violation, all of it floods over them at once. The men didn't take much, just some cash, a few personal items from the bedroom, but it's the terror of the experience that lingers. A close call. The days following the break-in are a blur of shock and recovery. The snowstorm eventually clears, and the narrator is able to reach their family. Their brother arrives safely, though visibly worried about what happened. He offers to call the police, but the narrator insists they're fine, just shaken up. The break-in, however, has left its mark, and they can't shake the feeling of being watched, of being unsafe in their own home. But despite the lingering anxiety, Christmas goes on. The family gathers, and for a moment, everything feels normal again. The warmth of the holiday spirit fills the cabin, laughter, stories, the clinking of glasses, and the crackle of the fireplace. As the days pass, the narrator finds comfort in the presence of their family, yet there's still an undercurrent of discomfort. They reflect on how people can become desperate, cruel, even during a time when goodwill should prevail. The holiday season, once a time of peace and celebration, now carries a darker edge. The feeling of safety is fragile, easily shattered by the harshness of the world. A creepy family Christmas. Years earlier, another Christmas had left the narrator with an uneasy feeling that they couldn't quite explain. They were just 10 years old, a shy, introspective child who preferred to stay in the background, watching the adults laugh and talk over dinner. This year, however, the atmosphere was different. Their cousin's boyfriend, Drew, had come to visit, and from the moment he arrived, something felt off. Drew was charming, no doubt. He had an easy smile, a disarming way with words, but there was something about him that unsettled the narrator. He seemed too focused on their younger brother, Alex, who was only 7 at the time. Drew would find reasons to linger around Alex, helping him with his Christmas presents, talking to him quietly when the adults weren't looking, offering him treats when no one else was paying attention. At first, the narrator brushed it off as harmless, but as the night wore on, they couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Drew's attention was more than just friendly. Drew's eyes seemed to follow Alex around the room, and the more the narrator observed, the more the uncomfortable sensation grew. When Alex went to bed, Drew would make sure to check in on him before heading to his own room. Every movement, every word Drew said to Alex felt like an intrusion into their siblings' innocence. The narrator, too young to fully understand the depth of what they were feeling, just knew that it wasn't right. Later that night, as the family was sitting around the tree, Drew insisted on joining the kids for their bedtime story. When Alex hesitated, Drew coaxed him, reassuring him that he could read better than anyone else. There was a strange, possessive quality in his voice that made the narrator's stomach turn. As Drew sat on the edge of Alex's bed, reading aloud in that soft, too familiar tone, the narrator knew something wasn't right. But just as quickly as it had begun, the discomfort passed, hidden beneath the layers of holiday cheer. Drew left the next day with a promise to visit again soon. But for the narrator, the unease lingered long after he was gone. Years later, the pieces of that holiday came together, revealing the truth about Drew and the kind of man he really was. But in that moment, as a child, the narrator could never have known what lay beneath the surface of that unsettling Christmas visit. That holiday season, too, had its own darkness, one that would stay with them forever, a quiet whisper in the back of their mind every time the holidays came around again. Unsettling discovery. Christmas Eve had always been a magical time in their family, a time for warmth, joy, and togetherness. But that year something felt different, as though a shadow was creeping into the holiday cheer. The narrator had gone to bed early, eager to wake up to the excitement of Christmas morning. But during the night, they woke suddenly, their heart pounding. Something wasn't right. They glanced around the room. Everything was still. But then they heard the softest shuffle from outside their bedroom door. Curious, they crept out of bed, quietly opening the door. The house was eerily silent, and a thick chill hung in the air, unusual for a night that was supposed to be filled with warmth. The hallway was dark, and when the narrator reached the living room, they froze in shock. There, in the middle of the snow-covered front yard, stood their younger brother, Alex. He was bundled up in his pajamas, barefoot, and his wide eyes were fixed on something, or someone, standing in the darkness. The figure was Drew. Drew, who had always been so friendly, so charming, seemed different tonight. His face was shadowed, and his voice, when he spoke, was eerily calm. "Come on, Alex," Drew coaxed. "The night's still young. Come play with me." The narrator's stomach dropped. Why was Drew out there with Alex, so late, in the freezing cold? Why was he encouraging their younger brother to be outside, alone, when they should have been celebrating Christmas with the rest of the family? Alex, too young to understand, shuffled closer to Drew, his hands clutched at his sides. The narrator felt the overwhelming urge to call out, but they were paralyzed by a strange mix of fear and confusion. The cold night air seemed to freeze the words in their throat. They wanted to protect Alex, but couldn't bring themselves to speak up, to confront Drew in that moment. Instead, they watched in silence as Drew turned toward the house, his hand gently urging Alex to follow him. The moment felt like a cruel dream. When Drew finally led Alex back inside, the narrator silently retreated to their room, shaken but unsure of what to do. They told themselves it was probably nothing, that Drew had only wanted to make Christmas memorable for Alex, but deep down the unease lingered. A terrifying Christmas morning. The morning sun crept in through the curtains, gently waking the narrator. It was Christmas morning, the day they'd been waiting for all year, filled with anticipation and joy. The house was alive with the sounds of family waking up, laughter echoing through the halls. The narrator's heart should have been light, but the weight of the strange events from the night before hung heavily in the air. They moved into the kitchen to prepare breakfast, a warm smile on their face as they thought about the cookies left out for Santa the night before. After all, it was a family tradition. The kids would leave a plate of cookies, a glass of milk, and a handwritten note just to make sure Santa knew they were well-behaved all year. It was a ritual they never missed. As they entered the living room, their smile faltered. The plate was empty. All the cookies were gone, except for one, the half-eaten cookie they had nibbled on before bed. They froze. The narrator's mind raced. How could it be? They had clearly seen the plate full the night before. They glanced over at their young son, who was already bouncing with excitement, his eyes wide as he pointed to the empty plate. "I saw him, Mommy," their son said with a grin. "I saw Santa. He was eating the cookies." The narrator's skin prickled. Something wasn't right. How could their son have seen Santa eating the cookies when they had only gone to bed a few hours before? The idea that Santa had come, eaten the cookies, and left seemed impossible, especially since no one had heard a sound during the night. It felt as if something or someone had been moving through the house unnoticed. "Are you sure, sweetie?" the narrator asked, trying to remain calm. "Yes, Mommy, I saw him," their son insisted. "He was really tall, and his suit was so red. He smiled at me." A chill ran down the narrator's spine. This wasn't just the excitement of a child's imagination. There was an odd certainty in their son's voice, one that made the hair on the back of their necks stand on end. The unease from the night before began to fester again. What had really happened? Investigating the basement. As the day wore on, the oddities only grew. The narrator couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. They kept replaying the events in their mind. The strange behavior of Drew, the disappearance of Alex in the middle of the night, the empty plate of cookies, and the discomfort grew with each passing hour. In a moment of desperation to understand what had happened, the narrator decided to investigate. Their eyes wandered to the basement door, an area of the house that had been largely unused for years. It was cold and damp down there, and no one ever really went into the basement anymore. They'd stored old furniture, broken-down boxes, and forgotten holiday decorations in there, but that was all. The thought of venturing into the basement, however, made their stomach tighten. Yet, something was pulling them toward it. Something wasn't right. With a deep breath, the narrator grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and descended the stairs into the dim, musty basement. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and dust. The floorboards creaked underfoot, adding to the eerie atmosphere. The beam of light swept over the forgotten boxes, scattered papers, and broken chairs. It all seemed so normal, yet something was off. The sound of something scraping against the floor made the narrator freeze. Their heart raced. The flashlight flickered as they slowly turned toward the noise. Behind a stack of old boxes, they saw a shadow, an outline of something large, breathing heavily. It was faint at first, but the sound of breath grew louder, deeper. A cold sweat broke out on the narrator's forehead. They inched closer, the beam of light trembling in their hands. Was someone down here? Was it Drew? The breathing stopped. The narrator held their breath, trying to hear over the pounding in their ears. Then, just as quickly as it had stopped, the sound of a soft shuffle came from behind the boxes. It was deliberate, slow. The narrator's mind screamed for them to turn back, but they couldn't. With a burst of courage, they shone the flashlight directly behind the boxes. But to their horror, the space was empty. There was no one there. The breathing had been a figment of their imagination. Or had it? They quickly backed away, the hairs on their necks standing on end. They didn't know what they had just experienced, but it was clear. Something was wrong. And the mystery of that Christmas would continue to haunt them for years to come. Hawthorne Hollow, a peaceful small town with cobblestone streets and quaint houses, always brimmed with magic every December. For Sarah, a 27-year-old single mother, and her 8-year-old son, Mark, Christmas was a time of warmth and joy. Their Victorian-style house, inherited from her grandparents, held many cherished memories. But that Christmas, the house that was once their safe haven, became the center of a haunting nightmare, an unexpected encounter with Santa. On the afternoon of December 24th, Sarah took Mark to the mall to shop for Christmas gifts and soak in the festive atmosphere. Mark, with the enthusiasm of a young boy, darted from one toy store to another, insisting on a Nintendo Switch for Christmas, a gift Sarah had already secretly purchased. As they exited the mall through the south entrance, a Santa Claus appeared out of nowhere. He stood near the door, waving at passers-by and spreading holiday cheer. Mark's eyes lit up as he tugged his mother's hand. "Hi, Santa," Mark exclaimed. Santa crouched to meet Mark's gaze, his eyes scanning the boy with an oddly intent look. "Well, well, Mark, have you been a good boy this year?" Mark nodded vigorously. "Yes, I even helped Mom bake cookies," Santa laughed, a loud, exaggerated laugh that sounded unsettling. "Cookies, huh? Maybe I'll stop by tonight to have a taste." Sarah forced a smile and pulled Mark closer. "Come on, Mark. Say goodbye to Santa. We need to go." As they walked away, Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine, like someone's eyes were boring into her back. She glanced over her shoulder and found Santa still watching them, an eerie smile lingering on his face. She shook her head, dismissing the feeling as paranoia, the signs of something amiss. Once home, Sarah tried to shake off the unease. Mark, blissfully unaware, dashed to the living room and turned on his favorite Christmas movie. Sarah locked the doors, drew the curtains, and did her best to enjoy the evening with her son. But as they laughed and enjoyed the film, The doorbell suddenly rang. Sarah froze and glanced at the clock. It was almost 10 p.m., far too late for visitors. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice trembling. A deep voice responded from the other side of the door. "It's Santa. You dropped something at the mall. I just wanted to return it." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She knew she hadn't dropped anything. "You've got the wrong house. Please leave or I'll call the police," she replied firmly. After a moment of silence, the voice returned, softer but more sinister. "No need to be so tense, Sarah. We just met earlier, remember?" The way he said her name made her blood run cold. She grabbed Mark and retreated to the farthest room, dialing 911 immediately, uncovering the terrifying truth. The police arrived quickly but found no one outside. They advised Sarah to stay vigilant and consider installing additional security measures. But the ordeal wasn't over yet. The next morning, Sarah found a note slipped under her door. The message left her breathless. "Dear Sarah, you and Mark are absolutely lovely. I can't stop thinking about the two of you since we met at the mall. I feel we share a special connection, don't you? Don't worry, I already know where you live. I'll be waiting for the right moment to become a part of your family. Merry Christmas, your Santa." Sarah immediately contacted the police, handing over the letter as evidence. After a thorough investigation, authorities discovered that the man was not an employee of the mall, but a dangerous individual who had been stalking Sarah for weeks. He was apprehended and charged with multiple offenses. A haunting lesson that Christmas left an indelible mark on Sarah's life. Although the man was caught, the memory of his intrusion lingered. She found herself double-checking locks and peering out windows at night, her sense of security forever shaken. Sarah learned a vital lesson that year. Sometimes the things that seem most innocent can hide the darkest shadows. Mamunam. The night Santa came back. That Christmas Eve started off as idyllic as any could be. Sarah and Mark, snuggled up on the couch, immersed themselves in Home Alone. Mark, with his infectious laughter, reenacted scenes from the movie, occasionally quoting lines as if he were Kevin McAllister himself. The living room glowed with the soft light of the Christmas tree, its ornaments casting shimmering patterns on the walls. Sarah felt her earlier unease from the mall slipping away, replaced by the cozy comfort of home. But as the credits rolled and the room fell silent, a sound broke the tranquility. The doorbell. The unexpected visitor. Sarah glanced at the clock, 10:15 p.m. Her brows furrowed. It was far too late for visitors, especially in their quiet town of Hawthorne Hollow. Her first thought was of carolers, but the timing seemed odd, and there was no accompanying music or chatter. Mark, still lost in the warmth of the moment, looked up curiously. "Stay here, sweetheart," Sarah said, her voice calm but her instincts tingling with unease. She approached the door slowly, her heart thumping louder with each step. Peeking through the peephole, her breath hitched. It was him, Santa, the mall Santa. His red suit stood out starkly against the snowy backdrop, and his face, partially obscured by the thick, fake beard, looked eerily calm. His presence felt wrong, unnatural. "Miss, you dropped something earlier," he called, his voice muffled but still recognizable. Sarah's fingers tightened around the doorknob. She hadn't dropped anything. She was certain. "I don't think so," she replied, her voice trembling but firm. "Please leave." The man shifted slightly, his body language still unnervingly calm. "I just want to return it," he said again, his tone now tinged with irritation. "It's Christmas, after all. Don't be rude." The realization. Sarah stepped back, her hands shaking as she grabbed her phone and called the mall's management office. Her gut twisted as the man on the other end of the line confirmed her worst fear. "There is no official mall Santa this year," he said. The words echoed in her mind, the room spinning slightly as panic surged through her. Sarah returned to the door, her voice rising. "If you don't leave, I'm calling the police." For a moment, there was silence. She held her breath, hoping against hope that he was gone. But then, faintly, a chilling reply came. "Ho, ho, ho." The sound wasn't jolly. It was low, mocking, and sent a shiver down her spine. The terrifying night. Sarah called 911 immediately, her voice barely steady as she explained the situation. Mark, sensing his mother's distress, crept up beside her. She quickly ushered him upstairs to his room, locking the door and telling him to stay put. Minutes felt like hours as she waited for the police. From the upstairs window, she peered out into the front yard. The figure was gone, leaving only footprints in the snow. But the nightmare wasn't over. As the police arrived and began searching the perimeter, one of the officers noticed a set of tracks leading from the front door to the side of the house. The officer's flashlight illuminated a broken window leading into the basement. A fight for safety. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized the man might already be inside. She clutched Mark tightly, barricading the bedroom door with whatever she could find while the officers descended into the house. The muffled sounds of their search reached her ears. Doors creaking open, heavy footsteps, the occasional barked command. Then a shout. "Hands in the air!" The man had been hiding in the basement, waiting for an opportunity to climb upstairs. In his possession, the police found a crowbar and a tattered notebook filled with ramblings about Sarah and Mark. He had been following them for weeks, observing their routines, and the mall encounter had merely been his way of getting closer. A chilling aftermath. Though the man was arrested and taken into custody, the events of that night left Sarah shaken to her core. The idea that someone could infiltrate her life so easily in a season meant for joy and safety was a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking in the shadows. From that night on, Sarah changed every lock in the house, installed a state-of-the-art security system, and always kept a close eye on her surroundings. While the warmth of Christmas eventually returned to their home, the memory of that night lingered. A haunting reminder of the moment the magic of the season turned into a nightmare. Wool. The chilling Christmas note. The next morning, as the soft winter sunlight filtered through the frosted windows, Sarah made her way to the front door to grab the morning paper. But instead of finding the usual holiday cheer of advertisements and festive greetings, her eyes fell on something far more sinister, a note taped carefully to her door. The sight of it sent a cold shiver down her spine. A disturbing message. The note was typed, precise, and folded with unnerving care. Sarah hesitated before opening it, her hands trembling slightly. The words inside made her blood run cold. "You're beautiful, Sarah, and Mark is such a sweet boy. I'd love to be part of your family someday. You can't ignore the connection we had. I already know where you live, so let's make this happen. Merry Christmas. Ted." Sarah's stomach churned as she read and reread the words. The name at the bottom, Ted, was unfamiliar, but the tone of the message was unmistakably from the man dressed as Santa. The mention of Mark made her feel sick, and the phrase, "I already know where you live," echoed ominously in her mind. Calling for help. With shaking hands, Sarah dialed the police, her voice cracking as she explained the situation. 2 officers arrived within the hour, taking the note as evidence. They assured her they would look into it, promising increased patrols in the area. But as the days passed, the assurances began to feel hollow. There were no updates, no arrests, and no sign of Ted. Each time the wind rattled a window or the snow fell heavier, Sarah's paranoia deepened. She began checking every lock twice, drawing the curtains even during the day and avoiding leaving the house unless absolutely necessary. A sense of unease. Sarah tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Mark, but her fear seeped into their daily life. She enrolled Mark in a holiday art class to keep him occupied while she worked from home. But every moment he was away from her filled her with dread. One night, as she tucked Mark into bed, he asked innocently, "Mom, will Santa really come visit us?" Her heart clenched. She forced a smile and replied, "Santa's very busy, sweetheart. He has lots of kids to visit." Mark didn't notice the way her voice trembled or how she double-checked the window locks in his room before turning off the lights. An unexpected encounter. A few days later, Sarah ventured to the grocery store, a rare outing since receiving the note. She parked near the entrance, eager to get in and out quickly. As she loaded her groceries into the car, she felt a presence behind her. "Sarah," a deep voice called. She froze, clutching the bag of apples in her hand like a lifeline. Turning slowly, she saw him, the man from the mall, the Santa who had invaded her peace. He wasn't in costume this time. Dressed in a heavy coat and scarf, he looked unremarkable, almost ordinary, but his eyes burned with a disturbing intensity. "Don't be scared," he said, raising his hands as if to reassure her. "I just wanted to talk." Sarah's instincts kicked in. She dropped the bag, darted to the driver's seat, and locked the doors. Her hands fumbled to start the car, but before she could pull away, he leaned against the window, his breath fogging the glass. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice muffled. "We could be happy together, you and Mark." Sarah didn't wait to hear more. She slammed on the gas, speeding out of the parking lot and heading straight to the police station. The breaking point. At the station, Sarah recounted the encounter, her voice breaking as she described the man and his words. This time, the police seemed to take her more seriously. They began an active search for Ted, promising to patrol the area near her home more frequently. But the damage was already done. Sarah couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every sound in the night felt like a threat, every shadow a sign that Ted was lurking nearby. She installed security cameras, changed the locks, and started keeping a baseball bat by her bed. The arrest. It wasn't until Christmas Eve, exactly 1 week after the note appeared, that Sarah got a call from the police. Ted had been found loitering near her home, watching from his car. When confronted, he claimed he was just passing by. But a search of his vehicle revealed a notebook filled with detailed observations about Sarah and Mark's routines. Among the pages was a chilling entry. She smiled at me. That's how I know she feels the same way. Mark will grow to love me as his new dad. It's only a matter of time. Ted was arrested on charges of stalking and harassment. The officers assured Sarah he wouldn't be able to harm her or Mark anymore. A fragile peace. Though Ted was gone, the experience left Sarah deeply shaken. Even as the snow fell peacefully outside her window, the warmth of the holiday season felt distant. She knew it would take time to rebuild her sense of safety, but she also knew she would never ignore her instincts again. That Christmas, as Mark unwrapped his Nintendo Switch, Sarah held him a little closer. The joy on his face was a reminder of the love and strength she needed to protect him and herself. She had faced her darkest fears and emerged stronger, but the scars of that season would remain a haunting reminder of how quickly peace can be shattered. A Christmas Eve to remember. The house was quiet, the only sounds coming from the crackling fireplace and the soft rustle of wrapping paper. Sarah worked diligently in the living room, carefully wrapping the last of Mark's presents. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, its lights twinkling in the dim room, casting warm patterns on the walls. Outside, the snow fell steadily, blanketing the quiet town in a serene stillness. Mark had gone to bed early, excited for Santa's arrival, leaving Sarah a rare moment of peace. But as she reached for another roll of tape, a sound broke the silence, a faint tapping, coming from the kitchen window. A shadow at the window. Sarah froze, her heart skipping a beat. Maybe it's the wind, she thought, though the sound was deliberate, rhythmic. Slowly she rose, her hands trembling as she tiptoed toward the kitchen. The tapping stopped as she approached. Peeking through the blinds, she scanned the snow-covered yard, her breath fogging the cold glass. For a moment, she saw nothing. The yard was empty, the trees swaying gently in the winter breeze. She exhaled, her body relaxing slightly, until she saw it. A shadow shifted near the corner of the house, moving closer. And then, a face appeared. It was him, the same Santa from the mall. His face pressed against the window, his eyes wide and unblinking, staring directly at her. The fake beard was gone, revealing a smirk that twisted into something more sinister. The threat escalates. Sarah stumbled back, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. She grabbed the first thing within reach, a kitchen knife, and shouted, "Go away!" Her voice cracked, but she held her ground. The man didn't move at first. He seemed to savor her fear, his smirk deepening. Then, with a deliberate slowness, he raised his hand and waved. Suddenly, he disappeared into the darkness, but a faint laugh echoed through the frigid air, chilling Sarah to the core. It wasn't the joyful ho 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 of Santa Claus. It was a low, mocking chuckle that lingered long after he was gone. Calling for help. Shaking, Sarah grabbed her phone and called 911. Her voice trembled as she explained the situation, her words spilling out in panicked fragments. The operator assured her that officers were on their way, but every second felt like an eternity. She checked on Mark, who was sound asleep, blissfully unaware of the terror unfolding downstairs. She locked his bedroom door and returned to the living room, clutching the knife tightly. Within minutes, red and blue lights flashed outside her window. The police searched the property thoroughly, but the snow-covered yard revealed no fresh footprints. It was as if the man had vanished into thin air. The chilling discovery. The officers reassured Sarah, but as they prepared to leave, one of them found something, a candy cane broken in half, lying on the porch. Taped to it was a note, hastily scribbled and barely legible in the dim light. "You can't hide forever, Sarah. I'll see you soon. Merry Christmas." The officer's expression hardened as he read the note, and Sarah's legs nearly gave out beneath her. A sleepless night. The police promised to patrol the area and stay nearby for the night, but Sarah's sense of safety was shattered. She double-checked every lock, drew every curtain, and even pushed furniture against the doors. Despite her efforts, the house no longer felt like the haven it once was. She sat awake in the living room, the knife still in her hand, listening for every creak and rustle. Each hour dragged on, her paranoia growing with every passing moment. A clue in the snow. The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke over Hawthorne Hollow, Sarah stepped outside cautiously to check the yard. The snow, untouched the night before, now bore a set of footprints. They circled the house, leading from window to window, stopping at the kitchen and Mark's bedroom. The police returned, following the tracks to the edge of the property, where they abruptly stopped. It was as if the man had simply disappeared. Story 1. The Gas Station Stalker. It was a cold, crisp Christmas Eve when my family and I decided to make the drive home after a lovely evening at a nearby restaurant. The streets were eerily quiet, as Christmas Eve often is, and I could feel the weight of the holiday wrapping itself around the city like a blanket. My parents were exhausted, my younger siblings practically asleep in the back seat, but I remained wide awake, full of energy despite the late hour. The 45-minute drive home felt longer than usual. My little sister was complaining about how her best friend hadn't gotten her a Christmas gift, and though it was a trivial complaint, that night it felt out of place. The air was thick with tension, like something was brewing beneath the surface. As we passed through the outskirts of town, my dad decided to pull into a gas station to pick up a pack of cigarettes. It was a small, dimly lit place, tucked away just off the main road. I stayed in the car, too tired to get out, and began playing a new game I'd downloaded on my phone. The minutes passed by in a blur, but then something caught my attention. The clock on the dashboard. 10 minutes had gone by, which seemed odd. Everyone else had gone inside for a bathroom break, yet they were still not back. I tried to brush off the strange feeling that started creeping up on me, but it was as if the air itself had changed. I glanced up, and that's when I saw him. Standing under the flickering streetlight by the gas pumps was a man. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe around 5 feet 9 inches, but there was something unnerving about his posture. He stood stiffly like a mannequin, his arms hanging loosely by his sides. His face was partially obscured by the darkness, but I could see enough to know something wasn't right. His expression was completely blank, almost lifeless. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was staring directly at me, his gaze piercing through the car window. I tried to look away, hoping it was just my imagination, but my heart began to race when I realized he was moving closer. The man didn't walk. He glided, his steps unnaturally slow, like he was trying to remain unnoticed. But there was no mistaking it. He was coming for me. Just then my dad and the rest of the family returned, oblivious to what had been happening. I barely heard my father's explanation about an argument with the cashier. My attention was fixed entirely on the man. He had stopped in his tracks and was now glaring at us, his face twisted into an expression of annoyance, as though our presence was an inconvenience to him. We hurriedly drove off, my dad muttering something about the delay, but the strange man's image stayed with me, burned into my mind. The whole ride home I kept thinking about his blank stare, that odd posture, and the unsettling way he had moved. I told myself I was overreacting, but the anxiety gnawed at me. Later that night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I tried to distract myself by watching YouTube videos in my bedroom. The storm outside was fierce, with wind howling and rain beating against the window. Usually I loved the sound of storms. It made me feel safe, like the world outside couldn't reach me. But not tonight. Tonight the storm only amplified my unease. Suddenly, a loud thud against the window jolted me out of my thoughts. My heart skipped a beat. I had assumed it was just the wind or a bird, but when I looked out the window, I froze. There, standing in the middle of our driveway, drenched from the rain, was the same man from the gas station. He was staring directly at me through the window, his face illuminated by the weak glow of the streetlights. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, and he was grinning, a slow, twisted smile that made my stomach churn. It wasn't a friendly smile, but something much darker, something sinister. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Finally, I found my voice and let out a terrified yell. Within moments, my dad was in my room, his face filled with panic. I tried to explain, stammering about the man from the gas station, but my dad didn't waste any time. He grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and told me to call the police. As I fumbled with my phone, my eyes kept darting back to the window, half expecting the man to appear there, smiling that unnerving smile. I managed to dial the police, and it felt like an eternity before they arrived. When they did, they assured us they would take care of it. But the relief was short-lived. The officers soon found the man hiding in our shed at the back of the property. I could hardly believe it when they told us. The man had been there, right under our noses, lurking in the dark, trying to break in. The shed was the one place on our property where we had left the door unlocked. How long had he been there? What had he been planning to do? The officers took the man away, but as they drove off, I caught a glimpse of him in the back of the police car. He was staring at our house, that same creepy smile still plastered on his face. The next day, my dad and I inspected the property. When we checked the back door, I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. The handle had been damaged, scratched, and twisted, like someone had been trying to force their way inside. I couldn't help but shiver at the thought. How close had he been? What would have happened if he had gotten in? To this day, I can't go to a gas station alone without feeling that familiar prickle of fear on the back of my neck. And when I lock my doors at night, I often find myself checking them multiple times, haunted by the image of that man's blank, grinning face watching me from the shadows. I still don't know who he was or what he wanted, but the memory of that Christmas Eve will never fade. The Christmas lights on the house never seemed quite as warm again, and the quiet of the night never felt safe. The man at the gas station didn't just invade our space that night. He invaded my sense of security, and I've never felt quite the same since. Story 2. The Christmas Eve Intruder. It was supposed to be a quiet Christmas Eve. My family had split up this year, so instead of spending the night together, we took turns celebrating with different sides of the family. This year, I had decided to head home early from my grandparents' house, just to enjoy a few hours of solitude. The house was empty, save for the soft glow of the Christmas tree lights twinkling in the corner. I was looking forward to a rare moment of peace. No kids running around, no relatives crowding the living room, just me, a stack of DVDs, and the comfort of being in my own space. I pulled into the driveway and noticed something out of place. Across the street, there was an unfamiliar car parked along the curb. It didn't seem particularly odd. It looked like an average sedan. But it was strange to see a car there, especially since I knew everyone on the block. I shrugged it off, assuming it belonged to one of the neighbors or their relatives. It was Christmas, after all, so guests were common. I locked the door behind me and settled into the living room, the smell of leftover holiday food still lingering in the air. The fire crackled in the hearth, and I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. As I sat back to relax, a knock came at the door. It was sharp and insistent, and it sent a strange chill through me. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not this late on Christmas Eve. For a moment, I hesitated. I stood up slowly and walked to the door, peering through the peephole. A man stood on the doorstep. He wasn't particularly threatening in appearance. He had dark hair, glasses, and was dressed in a casual jacket and jeans. But there was something off about him. His eyes were too vacant, his expression too blank. He didn't smile or greet me in a friendly manner. He simply stared at the door as if waiting for it to open. "Is that car for sale?" he asked, his voice oddly calm and low, almost like he was trying to keep something hidden beneath his words. I was taken aback. I don't think so," I stammered, still unsure what to make of him. He shifted slightly, looking past me through the crack in the door, his gaze flicking nervously toward the interior of the house. "Is there someone here I can talk to about it?" His voice was still too calm, too steady, and my gut told me something wasn't right. "No," I replied quickly. "No one's home. You should try again, later." I wasn't trying to be rude, but something about this man set off alarms in my head. He didn't seem like someone with a genuine question. He seemed off. I shut the door before he could say anything else and locked it behind me. I stood still for a moment, heart racing, trying to shake off the strange feeling crawling up my spine. But then, just as I was about to turn away, I heard it. The sound of the door handle jiggling. It was subtle at first, just a faint twist of the knob, but then it became more insistent. The man was trying to open the door. Panic surged through me. I backed away slowly, trying to stay as quiet as possible. My eyes darted around the room, looking for anything to defend myself with. I reached for the phone, my hands trembling. The jiggling of the handle grew louder, accompanied by a series of heavy knocks, each one more forceful than the last. It wasn't just a simple knock now. It was a pounding, violent, as though the man was trying to break through. I could hear the wood of the door creaking with each blow. My breath caught in my throat, and I dropped to my knees, moving slowly toward the hallway, away from the door. My mind raced. What was he after? What did he want? And more importantly, why was he so desperate to get inside? As I crawled toward the back of the house, I suddenly remembered the garage door, the one that had a broken lock, the one I'd been meaning to fix for weeks but kept putting off. My stomach dropped as I realized that if he managed to get in through the garage, he'd be inside the house in seconds. I heard the distinct sound of the garage door creaking open, and then footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps that echoed through the house, heading toward the laundry room door. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the nearest thing I could find, a heavy metal paperweight sitting on the coffee table. I gripped it tightly, my fingers white with fear. Just then, I heard a shout from outside. A familiar voice. "Hey!" my uncle yelled. I froze. The man in the garage didn't. He didn't hesitate. The sound of footsteps moving quickly toward the back of the house, the distant thud of boots against the cold concrete of the driveway, told me everything I needed to know. The man was running. I rushed to the window, and that's when I saw him. My uncle running after the man, shouting for him to stop. The man was bolting down the street, disappearing into the shadows. My uncle chased him briefly, but stopped short, his breath heavy and confused. When he returned, his face was a mix of anger and concern. He came inside, his eyes immediately finding me crouched in the corner, clutching the paperweight like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. He wrapped an arm around me, trying to calm my shaking body, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He was just as shaken as I was, if not more. We immediately called the police, but without a plate number or a good description of the man, there was little they could do. An officer came and took our statements, but there was no sign of the man. No sign of him at all. The police did a quick sweep of the neighborhood, but nothing came of it. The man had vanished into thin air. The next day, my uncle and I inspected the house, looking for any signs that the man had made it inside. When we checked the back door, a chill ran down my spine. The handle was damaged, scratched and twisted, as if someone had tried to force it open. My stomach sank. The man hadn't just knocked. He had been trying to break in. That realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd been so close to being alone with a man who, in hindsight, had far darker intentions than just asking about a car. I still think about that night, every time the holidays roll around. I'm no longer able to stay home alone on Christmas Eve, or any holiday for that matter. The memory of the man at my door, the pounding on the wood, and the cold realization that he had tried to break in, it all still lingers. I often wonder what would have happened if my uncle hadn't come home when he did. Would I have been alone with him? What might he have done if he had gotten inside? To this day, I can't shake the fear that maybe, just maybe, that man is still out there. And every Christmas Eve, as the night grows dark and quiet, I double-check the locks on the doors. Story 3. The Naked Man with a Hatchet. On a lonely stretch of highway, where the only sounds are the hum of the tires and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees, a couple's peaceful drive takes a chilling turn. They had been driving for hours, making their way through the dense, quiet woods that lined the road, unaware that the night was about to plunge them into a terror they would never forget. It began when they spotted him, a figure in the distance, standing motionless by the edge of the forest. At first, the man appeared to be just another traveler stranded by the side of the road, perhaps someone in need of help. But as the car approached, the couple saw something far more disturbing. A naked man, his skin smeared with mud, standing eerily still. In his hand, he gripped a hatchet, its blade glinting faintly under the moonlight. The unsettling image froze them in their tracks. The narrator, a man of logical thinking, slowed the car, deciding to pull over and investigate. His girlfriend, sensing something was terribly wrong, urged him to keep going, but curiosity got the better of him. He parked the car at a distance and stepped out, trying to get a better look. As he crept closer to the tree line, the figure didn't move. It was as if the man were waiting, watching, calculating. His gaze was locked on the narrator, cold and unblinking. Before the narrator could get any closer, his girlfriend, now frantic with fear, blared the horn of the car. The sound echoed through the night, slicing through the eerie silence. The man, startled, didn't move immediately. But then, in a sudden motion, he raised the hatchet as though ready to strike. The narrator's heart pounded in his chest. He froze, unsure whether to run or stand his ground. In the tense moments that followed, the man slowly lowered the hatchet. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The figure turned and disappeared into the shadows as quickly and mysteriously as he had appeared. The narrator stood motionless, his mind racing with 1,000 questions, but no answers. The couple retreated to the car and drove off in a rush, their nerves frayed, their hearts still pounding from the encounter. When they reached the nearest town, they reported the incident to the local police. The officers seemed skeptical but promised to investigate. The search was swift, but no trace of the naked man was found. No signs of a struggle, no footprints, no hatchet, nothing to explain what they had witnessed. The man had vanished without a trace, as though he were nothing more than a figment of their collective imagination. Despite the investigation, the couple's nightmare didn't end there. The woman, who had once been fearless, now had trouble sleeping, haunted by the image of the man lurking in the woods. But it was the narrator who felt the full weight of the encounter. Weeks later, as they drove down that same highway, a strange sense of dread washed over him. His eyes constantly flicked to the roadside, scanning the trees, expecting to see the man again. The memory of the chilling encounter of that naked figure standing in the dark remained with him. And although time passed and the world moved on, the question lingered in his mind. Who was that man? Why had he been there in the middle of nowhere, naked and armed with a hatchet? And most terrifying of all, why had he been waiting for them? Some say the forest hides many secrets. Perhaps this man was one of them, an eerie reminder that not everything in the woods is as it seems. Every time the narrator passed that stretch of highway, his heart still raced, and the shadows of the trees seemed to whisper a warning. Even in daylight, when the road should have been safe, the eerie feeling of being watched lingered. And some nights, when the wind howled through the forest, he swore he could hear the distant sound of a hatchet cutting through the air. Had they escaped? Or had they just unknowingly entered a world where reality and nightmares blurred into one? Story 1. The Basement Intruder. Christmas Eve was always a joyous time for the narrator's family. At 12 years old, he loved the festive chaos that came with having uncles, aunts, and cousins filling the house. This particular year, he was reluctantly helping his mother prepare dinner while his dad stayed out of the way, bedridden with a bad cold. As the smell of roasted duck filled the air, his favorite cousins, Chris and Valerie, arrived, bringing along a new PlayStation game, Driver 2. Eager to escape kitchen duty, he dashed upstairs to his room with Chris and Valerie to play. But just as they were getting into the game, his mom's voice cut through their fun, summoning him back downstairs. The weight of holiday responsibilities was heavy on her, and she needed him to grab the stuffing from the basement. The narrator headed down to the dimly lit basement, a space he found both thrilling and eerie. The basement doubled as a makeshift pantry with shelves full of jars, boxes, and holiday staples. But as he rummaged through, something unusual caught his eye, a blanket draped over a figure in the corner near the sofas. At first, he thought it was just a poorly placed stack of blankets or pillows, but the shape seemed too human-like. His initial assumption was simple. This had to be one of his mischievous cousins, Chris or Valerie, hiding to scare him. Smiling to himself, he tiptoed closer, expecting them to leap out with a scream. But as he approached, a chilling realization crept over him. The figure wasn't moving. Before he could investigate further, the lights abruptly went out, plunging the basement into darkness. He froze, his breath quickening. From upstairs, he heard the basement door slam shut. Panic began to rise, but determination took over. Assuming this was part of his cousin's prank, he decided to turn the tables. In the darkness, he quietly stepped toward the covered figure, yanked the blanket off, and screamed to scare them. But what he uncovered wasn't his cousin at all. It was an old, disheveled man with matted hair and a gaunt, wild-eyed face. Before he could react, the man lunged, gripping the boy's neck with startling strength. For a brief moment, the narrator thought this could still be some elaborate joke, but the man's powerful grip and silence told him otherwise. Panic set in, and he screamed for help as the man tightened his hold. Suddenly, the basement door swung open, flooding the room with light. The intruder let go and bolted through the backyard basement door, disappearing into the snowy night. Family members rushed downstairs to find the boy shaking and in tears. Two uncles dashed outside, scanning the backyard and neighboring properties, but the man had vanished. The police arrived shortly after and concluded the intruder was likely a homeless man seeking refuge from the cold. They mentioned similar reports in the area, though that offered little comfort to the shaken family. Lesson learned. The experience left an indelible mark on the family. For the narrator, the basement, once a place of childhood curiosity, became a source of fear. The family vowed never to leave any doors or windows unlocked again, even in the perceived safety of the holiday season. While the warmth and laughter of Christmas Eve returned in subsequent years, a lingering unease always accompanied the sound of footsteps in the house or the faint creak of the basement stairs. This terrifying encounter served as a stark reminder that even in the glow of Christmas lights, the unexpected could still lurk in the shadows. Story 2. The Suspicious Girlfriend. Christmas Eve held a special kind of magic for the narrator, a young boy who was still navigating life without his mother, who had passed away when he was very young. His father, a hard-working and devoted parent, had been dating a woman named Sydney for a while. Sydney, with her warm smile and seemingly kind demeanor, had become a regular presence at their home, especially on weekends. For the narrator and his siblings, Sydney brought a sense of normalcy, a motherly figure they hadn't experienced in years. This year, Sydney stayed with them for Christmas. She joined in on their family traditions, from watching Elf together to sharing hot cocoa by the glow of the Christmas tree. For a brief moment, the house felt whole again, and the narrator began to wonder if Sydney might eventually become a permanent part of their lives. As night fell, the children stayed up late watching The Polar Express after their dad and Sydney had gone to bed. Around midnight, curiosity got the better of the narrator. He was at the age where the belief in Santa Claus was waning, and he wanted to confirm his suspicions that it was his dad who placed the gifts under the tree. Quietly slipping out of his room, he crept up the stairs toward the living room, where the tree's twinkling lights cast a warm glow over the darkened house. At first, he was excited to see gifts piled beneath the tree, but as his eyes adjusted to the light, he noticed Sydney crouched by the tree. She wasn't placing gifts, she was shaking them, inspecting the tags, and even opening a gift bag to examine its contents. His heart raced as he watched her pull out a makeup set clearly intended for his sister, only to scrutinize it before shoving it back into the bag. The narrator froze, unsure of what to do. He watched as Sydney moved to the kitchen, where his father's wallet sat on the counter. She opened it and pulled out several bills, slipping them into the pocket of her pajama pants. Then, as if emboldened, she opened the cabinet where his father kept his prescription medications. She removed a bottle, sniffed it, and examined it closely. At that moment, she glanced over her shoulder and locked eyes with the boy. Her expression shifted instantly from surprise to something darker. Closing the cabinet, she approached him with slow, deliberate steps. "What are you doing up?" she whispered sharply. "You shouldn't be spying on people." Caught off guard, he stammered something about wanting to see if Santa had come. Sydney's lips curled into a tense smile. "I wasn't doing anything wrong," she insisted. "I was just checking to make sure your dad's taking his medication. Go back to bed." The boy fled back to his room, heart pounding. He crawled under the covers, his mind racing with questions. What was Sydney doing? Was she stealing? Why would she take his dad's money and go through his medicine? Minutes later, he heard the creak of his bedroom door. He'd locked it, something his father usually prohibited, and for the first time he was grateful for breaking the rule. The doorknob jiggled several times before the sound of retreating footsteps confirmed she had left. The next morning, Christmas Day, began with the usual excitement. The family gathered to open presents, and for a moment, the boy thought he might have imagined everything. But his sense of unease returned when his father stormed into the living room furious. "Who took $60 from my wallet?" he demanded. The boy immediately looked at Sydney, who glanced back at him with a knowing, almost daring look. She didn't say a word, but her expression spoke volumes. Later, when his father's frustration hadn't subsided, the boy pulled him aside and recounted everything he'd seen. At first, his father was skeptical. "Are you sure? That's a serious accusation," he said. But as the boy described Sydney going through the medicine cabinet, his father's face darkened. "Why would you make that up?" he murmured, now clearly torn between disbelief and suspicion. That evening, an argument erupted between his father and Sydney. She denied everything, claiming the boy had misunderstood her actions. But her defensiveness only deepened his father's doubts. Despite her protests, the seeds of mistrust had been sown. A few days later, after another unsettling incident, the details of which his father never shared, Sydney left for good. The narrator felt a mix of relief and pride, knowing his honesty had protected his family. Lesson learned. The experience left the narrator with a deeper understanding of trust and vigilance. While Sydney had initially seemed like a kind and caring figure, her actions revealed a darker side. It taught the family the importance of listening to one another and trusting their instincts, even when it was difficult to confront uncomfortable truths. For the boy, it was a Christmas he would never forget, one that remias. Story 3. The Christmas Night Intruder. It was Christmas night in 21, and the narrator was visiting family in the snowy tranquility of Vermont. Their home, nestled in a quiet wooded area, was the perfect setting for a cozy holiday gathering. After a day filled with laughter, gifts, and a traditional dinner, the family wound down with their yearly tradition of watching Bad Santa by the fireplace. As the movie ended, the narrator felt the warmth of the season settling in as he prepared to sleep on the pull-out couch in the living room. The twinkling Christmas tree lights and the gentle crackle of the dying fire created a serene ambiance. The living room, with its high ceilings and rustic charm, felt comforting yet slightly imposing in the dark. After turning off the lights, he drifted into a deep sleep, lulled by the distant murmurs of his family settling into their rooms. That night, his dreams took an unusual turn. In the dream, he was seated at a large dinner table with family members, but something was off. The room grew eerily silent as every face turned toward him. His Aunt Melissa, her voice unnervingly calm, broke the silence. "There's someone in the house. Wake up." The words jolted him awake, his heart pounding as if he'd run a mile. For a moment, he thought it was just the vividness of the dream that unsettled him, but then he heard it. A faint creak, like a footstep on old wooden flooring. Sitting up, He squinted toward the kitchen, which was barely visible in the moonlight streaming through the windows. At first, it seemed empty, but as his eyes adjusted, he spotted a figure, a shadowy silhouette standing at the boundary between the kitchen and the living room. Frozen with fear, he watched as the figure began moving, its movements deliberate yet quiet, heading toward the back door. Summoning his courage, he shouted, "Who's there?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slipped out the back door, letting the cold air rush in as the door closed behind them. Panic set in as he scrambled to wake the rest of the household. His parents, brother, and uncle quickly threw on coats and boots, arming themselves with flashlights as they stepped outside to investigate. Snow blanketed the ground, making it easy to spot a fresh set of footprints leading away from the house and into the dense woods. The tracks were erratic, as though the person had been in a hurry. Though the family was tempted to follow the trail, the thick woods and the late hour made it too dangerous to pursue. Instead, they called the police. While waiting for the authorities to arrive, the family scoured the house to ensure nothing was stolen. Surprisingly, nothing of significant value appeared to be missing. Not the electronics, not the wrapped gifts under the tree. The police arrived and followed the trail into the woods as far as they could, but the tracks eventually disappeared. They speculated that the intruder may have been someone looking for Christmas presents or valuables, though they hadn't received any other reports of break-ins in the area that night. Despite the police's reassurances, the narrator found little comfort. The image of the shadowy figure lingering in the kitchen doorway haunted him. Every creak of the old house and gust of wind outside seemed amplified, keeping him awake long into the night. When he finally managed to sleep, it was fitful and plagued by thoughts of what could have happened if the figure hadn't left so quickly. Lesson learned. The incident left the family deeply shaken. What had begun as a peaceful holiday had turned into a reminder of how vulnerable even the coziest of settings could be. They decided to install security cameras and motion sensor lights around the property, ensuring they would never be caught off guard again. For the narrator, the experience was a chilling realization that danger could lurk even in the most unexpected moments. While he would never forget the warm glow of the Christmas tree or the laughter of his family that night, the haunting memory of the shadowy intruder served as a dark counterpoint to the holiday cheer, a reminder that vigilance is always necessary, even on Christmas.